Hi guys, welcome to Skholar IAS, your one-stop solution for IAS preparation. Myself Biswajit Sir, your faculty for geography. So in the last class we have ended with the topic of drainage system in India, and today moving forward we are going to begin with a new topic which is called as your climate. And in today's class of climate we are going to talk about what is the difference between climate and weather, and then we will also talk about the different factors which affects your Indian climate. Hi guys, so today we are starting off with a new topic from your NCERT of class 9, and as you can see today is our lecture number 7 and we are going to talk about your climate. Right now, when I say climate, what do you think the climate of India is? Now we all know that the type of climate that India has is called as your monsoonal type of climate, right? Now before we go on to understand this monsoonal type of climate, right, the first thing that we have to understand, what are the different factors which determines climate of a particular place. Now there are various factors which will determine the climate of a particular place. For an example, a factor can be your latitude, another factor can be your altitude, that means the height of a particular place, right? Then we also have other factors like distance from the sea, then we have other factors like your ocean currents which are found in a particular area, right? Then we have the pressure winds, the pressures which are found in a particular area, the wind system of the particular area, right? So before we go on to understand the monsoonal type of climate, how it enters India, how it goes away from India, right, we have to understand the different factors which determines the climate of a particular place. So today's class will be confined with only with these factors, but before we proceed to understand the factors that determines the climate, we will also understand what is the difference between weather and climate very briefly, right? So this topic of climate of India has been divided into 3 classes, and in the first class we will be talking about your weather and climate, and then we will talk about the different factors, right? Chalo, let's begin. So we are going to begin this discussion by understanding what is weather and what is climate, right? So let us go through the points one by one. So what is climate? Your climate refers to the sum total of weather conditions and variations over large area for a long period of time, about your 30 years, right? Then what is a weather? Your weather refers to the state of the atmosphere over an area at any point of time. So weather, what can we call this as? A short period, right? So any climatic condition over a particular area and over a period of time, very short period of time. For an example, what is the weather conditions during the daytime? What is the weather condition during the night time? So we will call this as weather. But what is climate? Climate is the average of weather which is found in a particular area for a long period of time. For how long? For more than 30 years. Understood? So climate is a long-term phenomena, whereas on the other hand your weather is a short-term phenomena. Understood? So your short-term means it can be day and night, it can be one day, it can be 2 days, but climatic condition of a particular place is for a longer duration of time. So we can call climate as an average of the weather conditions over a period of 30 years, right? Now how do we determine climate and weather of a particular place? We can determine it by understanding the elements of weather and climate. Or how do we judge the weather and climate? So we judge the weather and climate based upon different elements, right? So the elements of weather and climate are the same, right? That is your temperature, it can be your atmospheric pressure which is found in a particular place, then it can be the wind system of that particular place, it can be your humidity as well as precipitation which is found in a particular area. So these are considered to be the elements of weather and climate. For weather it will be short term, for climate it will be long term, but the elements of climate and weather, they are the same, right? So you may have observed that the weather conditions fluctuate over often vary within a day, but there is a common pattern over few weeks or few months. That is, your days are cold or hot, then it can be windy or calm, it can be cloudy or bright, it can be wet as well as your dry, right? So on the basis of generalized monthly atmospheric conditions, the year is divided into different seasons, right? So depending upon the elemental behavior of this climatic as well as your weather phenomena, we divide the year on a monthly basis into different seasons, right? Suppose we have a winter season, then the climatic elements will vary compared to the summer season, right? So the whole year has been divided into different seasons based upon the elements of weather and climate, right? So what are the different seasons can be? It can be your winter season, it can be summer season, it can be your rainy season as well, right? So the climate of India is described as your monsoonal type, which we will talk about, and in Asia this type of climate is found mainly in South as well as your Southeast Asia. So the monsoonal type of climate is not only found in India, but it is also found in the countries lying in South as well as your Southeast Asia, right? So this is the comparison between your weather and climate and as well as the elements of it, right? Now let us talk about the factors which determine the type of climate we will have in a particular place, right? So in total there are 6 major controls of the climate of any particular place, meaning there are in total 6 factors which will tell us the type of climate we will find in a particular place, right? So what are these? Firstly, we have latitude, then we have altitude, then we have pressure and your wind system, right? Then we have the distance from the sea, right? Then we have which is called as your continentality. Continentality means the interiors. If a place is farther away from the oceans or the seas, it will be beyond the effect of oceans and the seas, right? And that phenomena is called as your continentality. Then we have the other factor which is your ocean currents, and then we have the relief features, right? So these are the 6 factors, right? So let us go through briefly about these factors before talking in much more details about it, right? So the first point, due to the curvature of the earth, the amount of solar energy received varies according to the latitude, right? So look into this diagram here. Now this earth has a curvature, right? So the sunlight mostly falls where? The sunlight is mostly vertical along the equator. So if your sunlight is mostly falling perpendicularly at the equator, meaning the heat per unit area is more. Therefore the temperature in the equatorial area will also be more, right? But as we move away from the equator towards the polar areas, what will happen? The sun rays keeps on getting oblique, right? Or it keeps on getting slanted. And because of this, the energy per area, that means the heat keeps on decreasing. And if your heat decreases, your temperature will also decrease. This means that as we move away from the equator towards the polar areas, your temperature keeps on decreasing. And that is how a latitude plays an important role or a factor in determining what type of climate we will have, right? So as a result, your air temperature generally decreases from the equator towards the poles. And as one goes from the surface of the earth to higher altitudes, the atmosphere also becomes less dense and the temperature starts to decrease. Now for an example, if I take the consideration of the Himalayas, right? Now as we keep moving upwards, right, as we keep on moving upwards from the base of the Himalayas to the greater heights, what will happen to the temperature? Your temperature will also start to decrease, right? So in terms of latitude, we have understood from equator, if we move to the poles, the temperature decreases. Similarly, as we move from the surface of the earth to the greater heights, what happens to the temperature? Your temperature also keeps on decreasing, right? So we have understood latitude and then we have also understood altitude, right? So the hills therefore are cooler during the summer times, right? Then the next factor, what do we have? We have the pressure and the wind system. So the pressure and the wind system of an area depends on the latitude and altitude of a particular place. Now how so? We will look in the next slide. All right. Thus it also influences the temperature as well as the rainfall pattern. Don't worry, we will deal with this sentence in the next slide. All right. Then we have the sea. All right. The sea exerts a moderating influence on a climate, meaning if this is a coastal area, suppose this is the Deccan Plateau. Now these coastal areas are adjacent to the oceans. Here we have the Bay of Bengal, right? Here we have the Arabian Sea. So these coastal areas are adjacent to the your oceanic areas, right? So always remember, the coastal areas will always be under the moderating effect of the ocean, meaning the oceans will try to moderate the temperature or moderate the climate of that particular area. Fine. Now if I talk about the interiors of a continent, right? Now this area, for an example, it is farther away from Bay of Bengal as well as your Arabian Sea. So the type of climate which we will find here, it will be your extreme climatic conditions, meaning your temperature will be very high or your temperature will be very low. This is called as your continentality, a place as far as it can be from the influence of the oceans or moderating effect of the oceans, right? So in the coastal areas we will have a moderate temperature, hence we call it as the moderating effect. But in the interiors, as it is away from the oceans, we will see extreme climatic conditions, very high temperature or very low temperature. Understood? This is called as the moderating influence of the oceans, right? So as the distance from the sea increases, its moderating influence will decrease and the people experiences extreme weather conditions, like we have already discussed, right? And this condition is called as what? It is called as the continentality. It is called as continentality, that is very hot temperatures during the summer times and very cold temperatures during the winter times, right? Then the next factor that we have is your ocean currents. Your ocean currents along with the onshore winds affect the climate of a coastal area. Now when we say ocean currents, always remember that there are two different types of ocean currents. We have your warm ocean currents and then we have your cold ocean currents, right? Now for a particular area, for an example, if I have to talk about the coast of Peru, alright, which is in South America. In Peru we have a current which is flowing in this direction, right? So this current is called as the Humboldt current or the Peru current. Now this current is an example of a cold current. So what type of climate we will find here? The type of climate which we will find here will be totally different or in contrast in areas where we have warm ocean currents. Always remember this. So ocean currents are of two types, cold ocean current and a warm ocean current. In areas where we have cold oceanic cold currents, the climatic conditions will be different from the places where we will have warm ocean currents. Understood this? Don't worry, when we go into the oceanography topic, we will talk more in details about the ocean currents, right? But here I am just giving you an example in order for you to understand how your climatic conditions vary based upon your cold current as well as your warm current, right? Now for example, any coastal area with warm or cold currents flowing past it, it will be warm or cold if the winds are onshore. Now what is an onshore? If this is an area where your winds are blowing towards it, we call this as your onshore winds. And if the winds are moving away from a landmass, we call it as an offshore wind. Alright. Now finally, there is also the last factor which plays a very important role, which is your relief. That means topography of a particular place. Your relief too plays a major role in determining the climate of a place. For an example, in areas where we have high mountains, your high mountains acts as a barrier for cold or your hot winds. Now take for example the case of the Himalayas. Now in the northern part of India, here we have the Himalayas, then here we have the Deccan Plateau region. So from the Tibet, a cold wind starts to blow towards India. But the Himalayas, it having a higher elevation, it does not allow these cold winds to enter India. And because of this, the India as a whole sees what type of climate? It will see tropical type of climate, right? If suppose the Himalayas were not present, these cold winds would have easily entered India, and what kind of climate would we have seen? We would have seen a temperate climate, right? So this is how relief plays a very important role. High mountains acts as a barrier for your cold or hot winds, and they may also cause precipitation if they are high enough. Now if for an example, when I was talking about your Western Ghats, now as the winds or the monsoonal winds flow through the Western Ghats, it will rise up, and because of convection it will cause rainfall. And what type of rainfall? We call it as your orogenic rainfall. This I have already discussed, right? So high mountains acts as barriers. This point we have dealt with. Then they may also cause orographic rainfall or orogenic rainfall if they are high enough and lie in the path of rain bearing winds, right? Then in the leeward side of the mountain will remain relatively dry, meaning this portion will see rainfall, right? And the other side of the Western Ghats, it will not see any rainfall, it will remain dry, and these are called as the leeward side, right? Leeward side, or these are also called as your rain shadow area. Understood this? Fine. Now this we have dealt with very minutely, all the factors. Now we will talk in length and breadth of all the factors, right? So firstly we will talk about your latitude, right? Now the Tropic of Cancer passes through the middle of the country, which we have already discussed, from your Run of Kutch in the Gujarat region and up to the west to Mizoram in the east, right? So we have also dealt with the states through which the Tropic of Cancer passes through. Almost half of the country lying south of the Tropic of Cancer belongs to the tropical area, and all the remaining area north of the tropic lies in the subtropic region. Therefore, India's climate has a characteristic of tropical as well as your subtropical climates, right? So this is where the Tropic of Cancer passes through. So the areas which are to the south of the Tropic of Cancer, it experiences tropical climate, and the areas which are present to the north of the Tropic of Cancer, it will experience subtropical climate. So India overall experiences subtropical as well as your tropical climate, right? Now moving on, let us also talk about your altitude, which we have already done. Now India has high mountains to the north, that is the Himalayas, which have an average height of around your 6,000 meters. Now India also has a vast coastal area where the maximum elevation is only about your 30 meters, right? The Himalayas prevent the cold winds from the Central Asia from entering the subcontinent, like I have already mentioned, and it is because of these mountains that this subcontinent experiences comparatively milder winters as compared to that of your central India. Now how does it because of the higher elevation of the Himalayas, the cold winds are not able to enter India. Therefore the kind of winters that we see here is much more milder compared to the regions of Central Asia as well as your Tibetan region. Understood this? This we have already dealt with. So this was about your latitude as well as your altitude. Now comes a very important point, which is your pressure and your wind. Now in one of the previous classes I have also already mentioned that in areas where your temperature is high, we will have what kind of pressure? We will have low pressure. And in areas where your temperature is low, what kind of pressure we will have? We will have high pressure. And in low pressure areas, your air will always rise because your temperature is high, your air is getting warmer, meaning it is getting less dense and it will rise. So this is how a low pressure area looks like. And from this low pressure, as the wind rises, it will expand in both the direction, and as it expands, your heat per unit volume will decrease, meaning the air is now getting colder. As it starts to get colder, its density will increase, and as its density increases, this air, after flowing horizontally, as it getting cooled down, it will now subside, right? It will now subside. And the areas where the air is subsiding, what kind of pressure we see? We see presence of high pressure in these areas. Understood? So always remember, in low pressure areas your air will always rise, and in high pressure areas your air will always subside. And always remember, rainfall, precipitation will be seen in those areas where we have low pressure, because in these areas your air is rising, that is your convection, and because of this the air gets cold, condensation happens, which results in precipitation, right? So always remember, low pressure areas are the areas of instability, or they are unstable areas, meaning here we will have precipitation, and in high pressure, because of subsidence of the air, we see no presence of precipitation, we will see no precipitation. Very, very important. Low pressure, air rises, convection. As the air rises, heat per unit volume decreases, your air starts to get cold. Because of this, your condensation process begins, then condensation in turn will result in precipitation. So low pressure, air rises, instability and precipitation. High pressure, areas of stability, and then we will have no precipitation, meaning these are areas of calm conditions. Very, very important. Now, why did I explain you this? I explained you this in order to explain you the pressure belts which are found in India, right? Or sorry, found across the world. Now, across the world, there are 7 pressure belts, right? Now, let us understand this 7 pressure belts. Very, very important. Now, let us start from the equatorial area. In the equatorial area, like I have already mentioned, the temperature is very, very high. And if your temperature is high, what will be the pressure? We will have low pressure. So, in the equator, we have a pressure belt of low pressure, which we call it as the equatorial low. Very, very important. We call it as your equatorial low, which extends between 10 degree north and 10 degree south, right? So, at the whole equator along the latitude, we will have a low pressure, right? Now, very important. At this area, what happens? Your temperature is high, therefore your air will rise, and as the air rises, what will happen? It will now expand in both the direction. It will get cooled down, and in the adjacent areas, it will fall down. Therefore, in the adjacent areas, what we will have? We will have high pressures, right? And these high pressures, which are seen both in the northern as well as in the southern hemisphere, we call this as what? We call this as your subtropical high pressure belts. We call this as subtropical high pressure belts. Therefore, in the equatorial region, since we have low pressure, we will see rainfall, precipitation, and in the subtropical areas, since we are having high pressure belts, we will see calm conditions. And this belt extends from 23.5 degree to 35 degree, both north and south. Understood? So, how many belts did we get? We got the equatorial low and 2 subtropical high pressure belts. So, in total, till now we have 3 pressure belts, right? Then what happens? Then in the polar areas, your temperature is very, very low. So, what do you think the pressure will be there? So, in the polar areas, we will have high pressure, which we call it as your polar highs, both in your north pole as well as in your south pole, which is 90 degree north and south. Understood? So, how many belts did we deal with? 3 plus now 2 more. So, we have now 5 pressure belts, right? Now, what happens? Always remember, which also I have told you, your air along the surface will always move from high pressure to low pressure area, right? Along the surface of the earth, your air or the wind, okay, your wind will always move from high pressure to low pressure. So, what happens? From this high pressure polar area, a wind will move in this direction. Then from the subtropical high pressure belt, a wind will move from high pressure to low pressure. So, in these areas, what is happening? The wind which is coming from the polar highs and the wind which is coming from the subtropical high pressure, as it collides, what will happen? It will now rise up. And as it rises up, what kind of pressure we will see? We will see low pressure. And these areas are called as what? These areas are called as subpolar lows, which is found between 35 degree to 45 degree north and south, right? So, how many subpolar lows we will have? We will have in total 2 subpolar lows. So, in total, how many belts do we have? We have 1 equatorial low, we have 2 subpolar high pressure belts, right? And thirdly, 2 subpolar high pressure belts, then we have 2 subpolar, my bad. So, we will have 1 equatorial low, we will have 2 subtropical high pressure, then we will have 2 subpolar lows, and then what we will have? We will have 2 polar highs. So, we have 2 plus 2 plus 2, which is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And then what do we have? We have your equatorial low 1, then we have 2, 3, then we have the subpolar lows 2, right? That is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have 6, and then we have 7. So, in total, how many do we have? We have in total 7 pressure belts, right? So, let us do a quick review of this or recap of this. At equator, we have low pressure. This will be followed by high pressure here, then again alternatively we will have low pressure here, then again we will have high pressure here, then here too we will have low pressure, here we will have high pressure. Understood? So, these are the 7 pressure belts that we see. Alright. Now we have to understand these wind systems of the world, right? So how many winds do we have? On the surface of the earth throughout the year, 3 winds blow. Firstly, we have the trade winds, then we have number 2 the westerlies, and number 3 what do we have? We have the easterlies, right? So equator we have low pressure, subtropical high pressure, we have high pressure here. And what did I say? I have stated that along the surface of the earth, your wind will blow from high pressure to low pressure, right? Therefore, a wind will start to blow from the subtropical high pressure belts towards the equatorial low pressure belt, right? However, this flow will not be perpendicular. This flow from high pressure to low pressure, it will not be perpendicular, but rather it will have deflection. And this deflection is because of the curvature of the earth. This deflection is because of the curvature of the earth as well as the rotation of the earth. Because of the rotation of the earth, alright, because of the rotation of the earth, Coriolis effect comes into the picture. Your Coriolis effect states that because of the rotation of the earth, alright, because of the rotation of the earth, these winds will not flow perpendicularly, but it will have a deflection, right? Deflection is because of what? Deflection is because of your rotation. Now I have talked about the curvature of the earth, right? I have done a mistake here. It's not the curvature of the earth. Your deflection is because of the rotation of the earth, okay? My mistake. So kindly remember, the deflection is because of the rotation of the earth, right? So because of the rotation, your Coriolis effect will come into the picture, and your Coriolis effect is nothing but because of the rotation of the earth, it will not flow perpendicularly, but it will have a deflection. And where will be the deflection? Always remember, the deflection will be towards the right in northern hemisphere, and the deflection will be towards the left in the southern hemisphere, right? So this is how the winds look like. So the winds which are blowing from the subtropical high pressure, right? So the winds which are blowing from the subtropical high pressure belts, okay, let me draw this again, which is blowing from the subtropical high pressure belts towards the equator, right? We call this as the trade winds. Very, very important. We call this as the trade winds. And how does it blow? As it blows from high pressure to low pressure in the northern hemisphere, it will get deflected to the right and it will blow in this direction. It will blow in this direction, meaning it has got now deflected. And in the southern hemisphere, the deflection will be towards the left, right? Understood? So these winds which are blowing from the subtropical high pressure towards the equatorial low, they are called as the trade winds, right? And the trade wind which is found in the northern hemisphere, we call this as your northeast trade wind. And the one which is found in the southern hemisphere, we call this as your southeast trade wind. But the question here is why? Why? Because always remember, whenever we name a wind, we always name it from the place where it originates. If you look into the northern hemisphere, your wind is originating in which direction? It is originating in northeast, right? So therefore we call it as the northeast trade wind. But if you look into the trade wind which is found in the southern hemisphere, it is originating in the southeastern direction, and therefore we call it as the southeast trade winds. Understood this? Then the next winds that we have are the westerlies. Now where are these westerlies? Westerlies are the winds which are blowing from the subtropical high pressure towards the subpolar low pressure. Again, in the northern hemisphere, if you notice, it is getting deflected to the right, and here it will get deflected to the left, right? So these winds which are blowing from the subtropical high pressure towards the subpolar, we call this as what? We call this as your westerlies. Now why the term westerlies? Because it is originating in the western side, understood, and it is blowing towards the east. We always name it from the place or the direction where it originates, understood. Trade winds from subtropical high pressure to equator, westerlies from the subtropical high pressure towards the subpolar low. Then we have high pressure in this polar areas. Again, from this high pressure, a wind will blow towards the subpolar low pressure, getting deflected to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere, which we call it as the easterlies because they are originating in the east direction, right? So what are easterlies? Blowing from the subpolar high towards the subpolar low. So these are the three winds: trade winds, westerlies, and then we have the easterlies, right? So I hope this is clear. Fine, all these are not mentioned in the NCERT of class 9, but I had to explain you this because without understanding this, you will not be able to understand the subsequent topics, right? So the climate and the associated weather conditions in India are governed by the following atmospheric conditions. First is the pressure and the surface winds, which we have understood. Then we have your upper air circulation, which we call it as your jet streams, which we will talk about. And then we also have your western cyclonic disturbances and your tropical cyclones. So these are the your pressure and your winds, how it plays a very important role. So out of all these three factors, we have understood pressure and your surface winds, right? But now what do we have to understand? We have to understand upper air circulation, which are called as jet streams, and we also have to understand western cyclonic disturbances. Don't worry, we will deal with this in the subsequent slides as well as the classes, right? Next point, your India lies in the region of northeasterly winds. Now what are these northeasterly winds? These are nothing but your northeast trade winds, right? Now where is India located? India is located somewhere here. Therefore it is under the influence of the northeasterly winds, right? And these winds originated from the subtropical high pressure belt of the northern hemisphere, like we have already seen, and they blow southwards, gets deflected to the right due to the Coriolis force, and move towards the equatorial low pressure area, which we have already understood. And generally these winds carry little moisture as they originate and blow over the land. Always remember, the northeast trade winds, they originate over the land, and as it originates over the land, what happens? Always remember, in land the moisture content will be very less, right? And because of this, the northeast trade winds, they are dry. Fine. Therefore they bring very little or no rainfall. Hence India should have been an arid land, but this is not so. Why? We will talk about this, right? Then what do we have? Then the next point is that the pressure and the wind conditions over India are very unique. So it keeps on changing, the pressure and the wind conditions in India. Now during the winter time, what happens? There is a high pressure area north of the Himalayas, and your cold dry winds will blow from this region to the low pressure areas over the oceans and to the south, right? So during the winter times, what happens? To the north of the Himalayas, your high pressure starts to develop, and from this high pressure your cold wind starts to blow towards the oceans as well as towards the Indian subcontinent, right? But what happens during the summertime? During the summertime, the condition again changes, or it alternates, right? So contrastingly, what happens during the summer times? A low pressure area will develop over the interior Asia as well as your northwestern India. So what happens during the summer times? Your situation will change, and a low pressure area will develop over the interiors of the Asia. So here we will have development of low pressure, right? And this causes a complete reversal of the direction of the winds during the summertime, right? Air moves from the high pressure area over the southern Indian Ocean and in a southeasterly direction, crosses the equator and turns right towards the low pressure area over the Indian subcontinent, and these are known as the southwest monsoon winds. So now this we have to understand in much more details in the coming classes, but I will just give a brief about it, right? Because since this point is mentioned here, I will just talk very briefly about it, and in the coming classes I will talk much more extensively on this, right? So what happens during these summer times, right? During these summer times, as the sun is shifting towards the northern hemisphere, right? What happens? Here we will have a low pressure, right? And because of this, what happens? In the north, we will have presence of the northeast trade winds, and from the south, the southeast trade winds will cross the equator, and because of the Coriolis effect, it will get deflected to the right. Why it will get deflected to the right? Because in the northern hemisphere, it gets deflected to the right. Remember, so the southeast trade winds during the summertime, it will cross the equator because the sun has shifted to the northern hemisphere and the low pressure has shifted to the north, right? And here we will have presence of the northeast trade winds. Fine. So these winds which are trying to enter India, these are nothing but the southwest monsoon winds. So these southeast trade winds during the summer times it will get modified and we get southeast trade winds, right? So for the timing you just understand this. In the coming classes we will talk in much more details about this, right? Then what is the next? Next we have the upper air circulation, which we call it as the jet streams. Now when we were talking about the trade winds, the westerlies and easterlies, they were surface winds, right? But we also have winds in the upper atmosphere, right? And these are called as the jet streams. Now if you look into this diagram, there are two important jet streams that is flowing across the earth from west to east. We call this as your polar jet stream, and we have the subtropical jet stream, right? The upper air circulation in this region is dominated by a westerly flow that is from west to east, and an important component of this flow is the jet stream, right? Then these jet streams are located approximately between your 27 to 30 degree north latitude, and therefore they are known as a subtropical westerly jet stream. Now when I talk about jet streams, there are two different variations of jet stream. One which is found in the polar areas, which is called as a polar jet stream, and then we have another one which is found in the subtropical area, which we call as a subtropical jet stream, right? Now this subtropical jet stream is very important because this will give us an idea about how this subtropical jet stream affects the climatic conditions over India. In the subsequent classes we will talk about this, right? Then over India, these jet streams will blow south of the Himalayas all throughout the year except in the summer, right? And the western cyclonic disturbances are experienced in the north and the northwestern parts of the country are being brought in by this westerly flow. So during the winter times, what happens? This subtropical jet stream will enter India and it will carry the cyclonic disturbances developing in the Mediterranean Ocean, and this results in your cyclonic disturbances during the winter times. Therefore during the winter times we will see rainfall across the northern parts of India along the foothills of the Shivaliks extending up to the northeast India, and this winter rainfall is very helpful for the growth of your rabi crops, right? And in the summer what happens? This subtropical westerly jet stream will move north of the Himalayas, meaning it will no longer be present in the Indian subcontinent during the summer time, because the sun has moved towards the north, and as the sun moves towards the north, the jet stream will also move towards the north, right? An early jet stream, which is called as the subtropical easterly jet stream, blows over the Indian peninsula approximately over 14 degree north during the summer months. So during the summer months, as the subtropical jet stream, westerly jet stream moves away from India, another jet stream will develop, which we call it as the easterly jet stream, right? And in the coming classes we will talk about how this easterly jet stream is changing the climatic dimensions of India, right? So let us so this was about a very briefly and trying to concise this as much as possible, right? So this is what we have dealt with. So this will give you a better understanding of your climate, right? So in the subsequent classes I will talk more about all this, right? So let us deal with the questions before we conclude. Which latitude is called as the horse latitude? This I have not discussed, right? So your option is equatorial low, we have your subpolar low, we have subtropical high, we have the polar highs. Your horse latitudes, it is the subtropical high pressure belts. It is also known by the name of horse latitude. Very, very important, right? Next, what do we have? Which of the following is an example of a geostrophic wind, right? Now what is geostrophic winds? Winds of the upper atmosphere. Winds of the upper atmosphere, they are called as your geostrophic winds. And what was your example of a geostrophic wind? We had the jet streams, right? So trade winds, westerlies, jet streams, easterly. Your correct answer is jet streams, because trade winds, westerlies and easterlies, they are flowing along the surface of the earth, right? Fine. So this is where we will stop. So I hope you understood today's topic, where we have began by understanding the difference between climate and weather, and then moving on we have also talked about what are the different factors which affects the climate of a particular place. All right, and then concluding we have also talked about the specific factors which are responsible or which affects the climate of India. So in the next class we will begin, or we will proceed with the same topic, where we are specifically going to talk about the mechanism of monsoon. So stay tuned to Scholars for more such videos.